Hello, family. Welcome back to Dennis Digital Lab. We are starting a very important topic for anyone who wants to understand Windows enterprise environments, system administration, networking, and especially cybersecurity. We are starting Mastering Active Directory Introduction and Fundamentals. Now, family, I want you to listen carefully. If you've never heard of Active Directory before, don't worry. This lesson is designed to take you from absolute beginner level. I'm not going to throw big technical words at you and expect you to memorize them. We are going to break everything down into simple language, okay? We will not just be doing the theory part. Right after getting the fundamentals right, we will start building this lab from scratch. We'll create 3 Windows clients and then we'll create 2 domain controllers, and then we'll connect these 3 Windows clients to the domain controller and then set some group policies and implement some security inside it to simulate how real organizations and corporations implement Active Directory in their businesses to help secure their data and then to prevent cybersecurity threats. So please stick along to the end. We will not just be doing the theory, but right after it, we will start building this lab from scratch to get practical knowledge of how Active Directory is actually done inside a business or corporation. And we are going to answer the important questions. What exactly is Active Directory? Why do companies use it? What happens when you log into a company computer? And what is the difference between Workgroup and a domain? What is authentication? What is authorization? And later, we are going to break down forest, tree, domain, organizational unit, site, schema, global catalog, domain controller, DNS, functional levels, and Windows Server 2025. Okay, and I'm going to explain not only what these things are, but also why they exist, why they are important, what can go wrong, and why cybersecurity professionals needs to understand them. So grab your notes, let's start. All right, family, let's begin with slide 1. Look at what is written on the screen. What you will learn in this chapter. The slide tells us that we are starting from 0. This is important because Active Directory looks very intimidating when you first see words like forest, tree, domain, organizational unit, global catalog, domain controller, DNS, functional level. If you don't understand the function, these words can sound like completely unrelated things, but they are actually connected. Okay, so look at the first thing on the slide. What Active Directory really is in plain words. That is where we are starting. Then we will have Workgroup versus domain, then authentication versus authorization. Then we are going to understand why big businesses depend on Active Directory. After that, we are going deeper into the structure: forest, tree, domain, OU, also known as organizational unit, and site. And then we are going into what the presentation calls the engine room, okay, which is schema, global catalog, domain controller, and DNS. Finally, we will look at what's new around Active Directory in Windows Server 2025. So don't try to memorize all these terms right now, okay? Our job in this chapter is to build a mental picture. By the end, when you hear domain controller, you should immediately know what that means. When you hear OU, you shouldn't panic. And when someone says authentication versus authorization, you should immediately know the difference. Now, family, look carefully at this slide. The slide says, what is Active Directory? The slide gives us a very simple definition. It describes Active Directory as a big digital filing system. Now, let's slow down here. What does that actually mean? Imagine a company has hundreds or thousands of employees, okay? The company needs to know who are these employees, what computers are they using, what are their usernames, what are they allowed to access, what security rules should apply to them, and what security settings should exist across company computers. You cannot manage all of this efficiently by simply keeping information separately on every computer. No, that is why the slide says Active Directory keeps records of every staff username and password, every computer used in the office, every rule about who can open what, and every security setting for the whole company. So the big idea here is centralization. Okay, instead of having identity information scattered everywhere, Active Directory provides a central directory and management system for the Windows environment. Okay, now let's use a Ghanaian situation for example. Imagine a large organization such as MTN Ghana, has thousands of employees and many computers across different offices. Okay, if every computer independently managed every employee's identity and every security setting, administration would become extremely difficult. But with centralized directory services, administrators can manage identities, computers, groups, and policies much more systematically. But with centralized directory services, administrators can manage identities, computers, groups, and policies much more systematically. And this is where the phrase at the bottom becomes important. One system, one place, full control. Now, don't misunderstand that phrase. It doesn't mean the person literally controls every single thing manually. No, it means the organization has a centralized management point for the directory environment. And family, this is incredibly important in cybersecurity because centralization gives you control, but it also creates something else, okay? A very valuable target. If an attacker compromises critical identity infrastructure or highly privileged accounts, the impact can potentially spread across a large portion of the organization. Active Directory is powerful because it's centralized control, okay? But that same centralization is one reason it must be heavily protected, okay? So now let's move on to the next slide. Look at slide 3. The presentation says, think of Active Directory like a school main office. This is an analogy to make the previous slide easier to understand. Imagine a school with 5,000 students. Every student has an ID card. The school's main office keeps record of each student. That record can tell the school who is this student, what class are they in, which rooms are they allowed to enter. Now, imagine you arrived at the school gate. The security officer checks your student ID. If your identity isn't recognized by the school's records, you don't simply walk in. That's the basic idea the slide is trying to communicate here. Now look at the comparison. On the school side, student ID card. On the company side, it is the username and password. Then list of allowed rooms. In the company side, list of allowed files and folders. Then head teacher's rulebook. In the company side, it is group policy. And finally, gate scanner checking your card. In Active Directory, it is the domain controller checking your login. Okay, this analogy is extremely useful because it gives you a simple mental model. Think about Ghanaian University. Ghana Communication Technology University has thousands of students. The school needs systems to determine who is legitimate student and what resources that students can access. Active Directory uses a similar identity management idea in a corporate Windows environment. Now, here's an important lesson. Knowing who you are is not the same thing as knowing what you are allowed to access. We will see that clearly in slide 6 when we start talking about authentication and authorization. So keep that distinction in your mind, okay? Now family, slide 4 is very important. The title is Centralized versus Decentralized Management. And the slide gives us two sides. On the left, decentralized, no AD, which is no Active Directory. On the right is centralized, which is with AD, also known as Active Directory. Let's start with the decentralized side. The slide says the IT administrator may have to visit every computer individually. Each PC keeps its own local list of users. And if you want to change one password rule, you may have to repeat that work on every single machine in the organization. Now, imagine you have 5 computers. Maybe that is annoying, but it is possible. Now, imagine you have 5,000 computers. That is a completely different problem. If you have to visit 5,000 machines individually to make one security change, you are going to waste an enormous amount of time. And the slide summarizes the problem. Slow, tiring, easy to make mistakes. That is the disadvantage of decentralized management. Okay, now look at the analogy on the slide. It compares it to a landlord visiting every single house to change one lock. Imagine a landlord owns 500 houses. Every house has a different lock. Then one day, the landlord decides, I want to change the lock. If he has to physically visit every house, that is a huge amount of work. But now imagine the whole building uses one centralized locking system. The landlord changes the setting from one centralized panel. That is the basic idea behind centralized management. With Active Directory, administrators can make centralized changes that can apply across many computers and users. Now, here is the big advantage: consistency. You don't want computer 1 to have one security rule, computer 2 to have another, and computer 3 to have no security rule at all. Centralized management helps organization enforce consistent configurations, but here is also a disadvantage. If an administrator make a bad centralized change, the impact can be much larger. That is the trade-off. Centralized control gives you efficiency and consistency, but it also increases the potential impact of mistakes or abuse. That is something every cybersecurity professional needs to understand. Okay, now we are on slide 5. The title says Workgroup versus Domain Environment. This is another concept you absolutely need to understand. Okay, let's start with the workgroup. The slide says there is no centralized management. Each computer manages its own users. Passwords are stored locally on each machine, and it becomes difficult to manage as you grow. So imagine you have a small shop in Accra with 3 computers. Maybe the owner has 1 computer, the cashier has another, and maybe the manager too has another. A simple work group or local accounts arrangement might be sufficient, yeah, because there are only few machines. Now imagine the business grows. Suddenly there are 300 computers, then 1,000, then 5,000. Now, managing each computer individually becomes painful. That is where the domain environment becomes much more useful. Now, the slide says domain provides centralized authentication. Domain controllers managing identity, one login across the company environment, and centralized policies through group policy. So here is the simple way to remember this. Workgroup, every computer is basically managing itself. That is workgroup. Then the domain, computers and users participate in a centralized organizational environment. Now let's talk cybersecurity. Imagine an employee leaves a company. In a centralized environment, IT can disable or manage that person's domain account. In a decentralized environment with many independent local accounts, managing access can become more complicated. So one major benefit of domain is centralized identity management. But there is also a security disadvantage here. Because identity becomes centralized, the domain becomes extremely important to protect. Yes, if an attacker obtains powerful credentials in the domain, they may potentially gain access to many resources. That is why Active Directory security is such a big topic in cybersecurity. Okay, now let's move on to slide 6. Slide 6 talks about authentication versus authorization. They sound similar, but they answer different questions completely. Okay, the authentication asks, who are you? The slide uses the example of walking into a big event. Security checks your ID card. They are trying to determine, are you really this person? In Active Directory, the slides mention things like username and password, a smart card, or a keyboard ticket. So authentication is about proving your identity. Now, authorization is completely different. Authorization asks, what can you do? After your identity has been proven, what can you do? Imagine you enter the event, the security guard accepts your ID. You are authenticated, yes, but now you have a wristband. Maybe your wristband allows you into the normal area. Another person's wristband allowed them into VIP. So both people have successfully authenticated, but they don't have the same permissions. No, that is authorization. In Active Directory, authorization can involve things like folder permissions, application access, database access. So remember this, authentication is who you are and authorization is what are you allowed to access. After you've proven that you are who you say you are, what can you do now? Okay, so let's use a simple Ghanaian workplace for example. Imagine you are working at Ghana Commercial Bank, okay? You log into your company's computer using your credentials. The system verifies that you are actually you. That is authentication. But after you log in, can you automatically access the bank administrator system? No. Your account has specific permissions. Maybe you are a normal employee. Maybe you are in finance. Maybe you are in IT. Maybe you are a system administrator. Those different roles determine what you are authorized to access, what you have permission to access. Okay, and this is extremely important in cybersecurity. An attacker may steal someone's credentials and successfully authenticate as that person. But what happens next depends on the privilege associated with that identity. Okay, that is why least privilege is so important. The less unnecessary access an account has, the less damage a compromised account may potentially cause. Okay, now let's move on to slide 7. Now, slide 7, the title says business value, why businesses rely on Active Directory. And the slide gives us 6 major reasons. Let's take them one at a time. Number 1, centralized identity. The slide says one record of every staff member kept in one single place. Imagine a company with 5,000 employees again. Instead of identity information being scattered across individual computers, Centralized Directory Service provides a structured place to manage identities. Okay, that makes administration easier. Number 2, single sign-on. The slide says log in once and reach many company apps without logging in again. This improves convenience. Imagine an employee have to enter a different username and password for every internal application. That can become frustrating. So SOS can reduce that friction. But here is the cybersecurity issue. If one identity becomes extremely important because it provides access to many systems, protecting that identity becomes even more important. Convenience can create concentration of risks. Okay, so now number 3 is group policy. The slide says you can push one rule to every computer. Okay, that is the group policy. You can push one rule to every single computer in the organization. Instead of configuring thousands of machines manually, administrators can centrally apply policies. Okay, we will go deep into that in the next slide. Okay, so right now keep that in mind. And number 4, we have simplified IT. Okay, simplified IT. The slide says a small IT team can manage thousands of computers more easily. That is a huge advantage. Imagine 10 IT administrators managing thousands of computers. Centralization becomes almost necessary at that scale. So we move on to the 5th one, which is application integration. The slide mentions emails, VPN, databases, and other systems. This means Active Directory can become part of the organization's broader identity infrastructure. Instead of every application having completely separate identity management, systems can integrate with centralized identity services. And number 6, we have compliance and auditing. The slide says track who did what and exactly when they did it. Imagine an employee access sensitive information. An organization may need to investigate who was the account, what did the account do, when did it happen, and what system was involved. Auditing helps organizations investigate incidents and demonstrate accountability. So family, when you look at all these 6 benefits together, you understand why large organizations rely heavily on centralized identity infrastructure. Okay, now we are looking at slide 8. The title says group policy, one rule, every machine. What does it even mean? The slide defines group policy as a way to send one rule to thousands of computers from one place. Okay, and the analogy I use in this slide is a radio station. Imagine a radio presenter speaks into one microphone. The message is broadcast to thousands of radios. The presenter doesn't work to every radio individually. One broadcast, many receivers. Group policy is similar in the sense that administrators can centrally define policies that apply to targeted computers or users. Now look at what the slide says group policy can enforce. It can enforce strong password requirements. It can lock a screen after 5 minutes. It can block USB drives. It can install software. And it can standardize things like wallpapers and shortcuts. Now think about why this matters. Suppose an organization says every company computer must lock after 5 minutes of inactivity. Without centralized policy, someone might have to configure many computers manually. With centralized policy, the organization can enforce the setting much more efficiently. But family, here's a very important disadvantage. Centralized power can create centralized mistakes. Imagine an administrator accidentally creates a policy that blocks something critical. If that policy gets applied broadly, many companies can be affected. So group policy is very powerful. But powerful tools requires testing, change control, proper permissions, and careful administration. And from a cybersecurity perspective, you should understand group policy because attackers and defenders both care about configuration. A defender wants policies that strengthen security. An attacker may look for weaknesses in configuration or ways to abuse excessive privileges. Now family, this is where the presentation officially introduced Meridian Retail Group. Okay, this is just an imaginary company or group I just brought up. Okay, so from this point forward, you will see Meridian used repeatedly in this slide. Okay, Meridian is a made-up company used to make the concept easier to picture. Okay, so I intentionally made it so that you understand it very well. Meridian operates retail stores and online shopping. It has 5,000 plus employees. Its offices are Accra, which has the head office over there, Kumasi, it has a branch over there, and London, UK office, okay? And it has a full Active Directory environment. Now, this is useful because instead of learning Active Directory as abstract diagrams, we can imagine what these components will look like inside an actual organization, okay? So from this slide onwards, when you hear Meridian, you should think a large company, thousands of employees, multiple offices, many computers, and a real Active Directory environment. That gives us something concrete to work with. Now we are looking at the first real-world example. The slides walks us through what happens when new staff members joins Meridian. Step 1. HR creates a new staff account inside Active Directory. So imagine a new employee has been hired. Their identity needs to be represented inside the company's directory. Step 2. IT places the account in the correct group. The slide gives finance staff. Why is this important? Because group can help organization manage assets based on rules. Okay? If you are a finance employee, you may need access to finance resources, but you shouldn't automatically receive access to everything in the company. And in step 3, Active Directory applies the correct permissions. This is where authorization becomes very important. The system isn't simply saying this person works here. It also determines what that person can access. For we have group policy pushes the standard company setup to the new computer. So the computer can receive the organization required configuration. Okay, yes, the new computer can receive the organizational required configuration. The configuration that has been set up already can be pushed to this new computer without much effort. Okay. Step 5. The employee logs in and sees the finance files and applications they are supposed to use. Now notice what just happened. A new employee entered the organization, and instead of IT manually setting up every single permission and configuration one by one, centralized system can automate much of this process. The slides compares it to getting a uniform, a badge, a room key all together. Okay, imagine you went to a new school and you are being admitted to the school. You'll be given a new uniform, a student badge if it is required in the school, and then the room key if you'll be using a dorm or something, your own dormitory or something. Yes, so that's the analogy I was trying to show here. Okay, and from a security perspective, this also shows why the joiner process matters. If someone is given too much access, that is a security problem. If someone is given too little, they can't do their job. And if someone leaves the company but their access isn't removed, that can become a serious security risk. So identity management isn't just about creating accounts, it's about controlling the entire life cycle of access. Okay, now let's move on to the next slide. The first part is department specific access. The slide says finance staff can access finance folder but not the HR folder. The HR staff can access HR but not finance. This is an example of separating access based on business needs. Why is that important? Because organizations contain sensitive information. Imagine finance has payroll information, HR has employee records, IT has administrative systems. If everyone should access everything, one compromised account could expose huge amounts of information. So access should be controlled. The slide says this in manage using organizational units and permissions. And there is a powerful sentence. Nobody has to trust people to behave. The system enforces it. Okay. There's no one to make sure that everyone follows the rules in the organization. Configurations have been put in place to enforce these rules. So there's no need for anyone to be monitoring these systems. Okay. So nobody has to trust people to behave. The system enforces it. That is the key security concept here. You don't want security to depend entirely on please don't open that folder. No. You want the system to technically prevent unauthorized access. Yes. Now the second part of the slides is company-wide password policy. The slide gives us an example requiring 8 or more characters, a number and a symbol. The rule is configured once through group policy. Then it applies to Meridian 5,000 staff accounts. Again, the advantage is consistency. But remember what we discussed earlier. Centralized policy can also cause problems if they are poorly designed or incorrectly deployed. So security isn't just about having policies. It's about having good policies that are tested and properly managed. Now let's move on to the next slide. The slide says the logical structure of Active Directory. And underneath it, we have from a whole company down to a single folder, how Active Directory is organized. This is important. So far, we've discussed what Active Directory is, why companies use it, how users and policies work. Now we are asking, how is all this organized? Okay, and the presentation gives us 5 building blocks, which is forest, tree, domain, organizational unit, sites. Okay, now don't memorize them yet. No, there's no need for you to memorize all now. We are going to build a structure one piece at a time. Okay, now let's move on to the next slide. Let's look at forest. Now we are on building block 1 of 5. Okay, I've mentioned the 5, which is forest, tree, domain, organizational unit, which is also known as OU, and then sites. Okay, but now we are taking the first one, which is forest, out of the 5. The slide calls it the whole country. Okay, the definition says a forest is the biggest boundary in Active Directory. Think about the word boundary. A boundary tells us everything inside here belongs to this larger environment. The slide compares that forest to an entire country. Inside a country, you can have many cities. Similarly, inside a forest, you can have multiple domains. Now look at the Meridian example on the slide. The forest is meridianretail.com. The slide says everything inside the forest shares a common schema and global catalog. We will explain those later. Okay. The slide also gives us an interesting scenario. Meridian buys a fintech company called NovaPay. Okay, NovaPay has its own domain, novapay.com. Okay, but that domain could join the same forest as another tree. I want you to be picturing this in your mind. The point here is that a forest can provide a larger logical boundary where different domains can exist together. Now, why should you care as a cybersecurity student? Because boundaries really matters in this case. When you are analyzing an Active Directory environment, you need to understand where does this identity exist? What domain is it part of? What larger forest is it part of? And what level of privilege does an account have? Understanding the hierarchy helps you understand the potential scope of an attack. Now we move to building block number 2, which is a tree. A family of related domains. The definition says a tree is a group of domains that shares a connected naming pattern. Okay, the presentation compares it to a family surname. Think about meridianretail.com, then gh.meridianretail.com, or ng.meridianretail.com, or uk.meridianretail.com. Look at what they all have in common. meridianretail.com. That is the root naming structure. So the slight idea is same root name, same naming family, same tree. Okay, this becomes useful when organizations have multiple domains that are logically related. The important thing here is not just memorizing the word tree. Understand what problem it solves. Okay, organization. It gives us a way to understand relationship between related domains. Okay, that is what you need to put in mind when it comes to trees. It helps in organization. It gives us a way to understand the relationship between related domains. Domain, a city inside a country. Okay, a domain is a city inside a country. That's how I want you to picture it. Okay, the slide defines domain as a logical group of users, computers, and rules. It also says the domain maintains its own database and its own local security office, the domain controller. Now use the analogy. If the forest is the country, a domain is a city inside that country. The city has its own local administration, but it still exists inside the larger environment. The Meridian example gives us gh.meridianretail.com. This represents Meridian Ghana domain in the presentation. Okay, inside that domain are Ghana staff accounts, computers, groups, rules. The slide also mentions DNS, domain controllers, authentication services. So when you hear domain, don't think only about websites addresses. Okay, in this context, we are actually talking about an Active Directory logical environment, and this is where many users, computers, and policies are organized. Now we are on building block 4, organizational units. Folders inside a city. The slide define an organizational unit as something like a folder inside a domain. Okay, its purpose is to group objects together so administrators can manage and control them more easily. All this will start to make sense if we start doing the practicals. Okay, so please just be picturing this in your mind. Okay, look at the Meridian example. We have finance, we have HR, we have the IT, we have the sales, and we have the warehouse. Imagine having thousands of users and computers sitting in one enormous list. It would be difficult to manage them all. Instead, you organize them. And this organization can help administrators apply appropriate policies and delegate administrative responsibilities. For example, finance user may have one set of policy, HR users may have another. IT administrators may have more privileged administrative responsibility. But family, here's something important. An OU or organizational unit is not simply a department. The deeper concept is that an organizational unit is a logical container used to organize Active Directory objects for management. So the objects in this case are the users, the computers, and other services and applications. Okay, those are the objects. Departments are just one common way to use OUs. Okay, that is organizational units. So now we're on the fifth building block. Okay, which is sites, the physical location. And this is one of the concepts beginners often confuse with an OU. So look carefully. The slide says a site represents the real physical place where computers sit, the actual building, the actual network, the actual location. So organization unit or OU is about logical organization. Okay, everything that goes on inside the computer. Site is about physical or network location. The Meridian example gives us Accra head office, Kumasi branch, London office. Now imagine an employee sitting in Kumasi. The slide says that employees should be able to use the appropriate logical infrastructure rather than unnecessarily relying on London for every login. Why? Because physical network distance matters. Sites can help optimize replication traffic, login speed, and which domain controller a client communicates with. Okay, so here's the sentence I want you to remember. Okay, OU answers more of who belongs where logically. That's the question. While site answers more of a where is this computer physically located? Okay, that is the question. The distinction is extremely important. Now, family, this is our structure recap. This slide brings everything together. Look at it from top to bottom. Forest, which is the meridianretail.com, the whole country, the top security boundary, the tree, which is the Meridian family of related domains, and the domain like gh.meridianretail.com. One logical environment containing Ghana users, computers, and rules. Okay, organizational units, we have the finance, the HR, the IT, the sales, warehouse. These are logical folders for organizing objects. Okay, yes. Now we have the sites, which is Accra, Kumasi, London. These are the physical office location. So the mental picture is forest, tree, domain, and then organizational units. Okay, forest is the top, then comes the tree and domain, and then the OU, which is the organizational unit. While site represents the physical or network location, I've summarized it beautifully here, which is forest equals the country, tree equals family of domains, and then domain equals a single city. Then we have OU, which is department folder, and then site, which is the physical office. If you understand this slide, you have built one of the most important mental maps in this chapter. Now we are moving into part 2, which is technical components and infrastructure. I've called this the engine room that makes Active Directory actually work. Okay, that is a very important transition. We've been talking about the structure. Now we are going behind the scenes. We are going to learn schema, global catalog, domain controller, DNS, functional levels, and the whole others. Okay, so think of what we have done so far as learning the layout of a building. Okay, now we are going into the engine room to understand what makes the building what operates. We are looking at schema. I'm calling it the blueprint/form template. The definition says the schema defines the structure of the entire AD database, which is Active Directory database. It decides what type of objects can exist, okay, and what information those objects can contain. The slide uses a government form analogy. Let's take the Ghana card for example. When you went to register for the Ghana card, you fill a form, and the form had your name, date of birth, address, and a whole lot. Everyone filled the same basic field. Okay, anyone who came to the Ghana card office to register his or a Ghana card filled the same form, his name, date of birth, and all those things. Okay, so that's this. That's the schema. So the schema is like the design that says these are the type of information that can exist for this kind of object. Okay, for a user, there can be attributes such as username, email, department, phone number. So the schema is essentially defining the structure. Now, here's why this matters. Imagine changing the design of a government form used across the entire country. That is not a small change. No, the slide warns that schema changes affect the whole forest. So if you modify something at this level, the potential impact is enormous. Yes, that is why hiding privilege changes to core infrastructure must be carefully planned and tested. From a cybersecurity perspective, you should immediately recognize this as high impact administrative area. Engine room 2 of 5, okay, which is global catalog. I call it the master phone book. The global catalog is special role given to some domain controllers, okay? It stores a short summary of objects across the entire domain, which is the entire country. Now, imagine a nationwide phone book. You don't need someone's entire life story. You just need enough information to find them. That is the idea. The global catalog helps you provide a forest-wide searchable view. The Meridian example says a manager in London could search for a staff member in Ghana or Nigeria because the global catalog covers the forest. Okay, so if someone is in London and wants to search for an employee in Ghana, with the help of the global catalog, he can find that person easily. Okay, yes. So now, why is that useful? Because organizations have multiple domains and locations. You don't want every search to be limited to one small section of the directory. The global catalog gives a broader view. A company can have more than one global catalog, enable domain controller for backup. Okay, and that brings us to one important enterprise principle, which is redundancy. Okay, if one critical server fails, another can help maintain availability. Okay, and we've come back to the CIA triad: availability. Cybersecurity is built on these three things: the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So here is availability. In cybersecurity, availability matters just as much as confidentiality and integrity. Okay, domain controller. Now, family, this is a big one. Okay, that is the engine 3 of 5, the domain controller. In this slide, I define domain controller as a real server that runs Active Directory domain services. Okay, that sentence is extremely important because sometimes beginners hear domain and domain controllers and think they are the same thing. No, domain and domain controllers are not the same thing. The domain is the logical environment, whilst the domain controller is an actual server that provides Active Directory service for that environment. Okay, I use this analogy in the slide. If the domain is the city, the domain controller is the city security office and record office. Okay, it checks your ID, it keeps master's records. Now, the Meridian example I use in this slide says that there are domain controllers in Accra, Kumasi, London. Why have multiple? Because of resilience. Imagine one office loses power or one server fails. If there are other domain controllers available, the organization may continue operating. Domain controllers check logins. They store your Active Directory database. They copy data to another domain controller, apply security rules, and also handle login requests. Now, here is the cybersecurity connection to this. A domain controller is extremely important infrastructure. If an attacker compromises a highly privileged account and gain control over critical Active Directory infrastructure, the impact can potentially be massive. That is why domain controller must be protected extremely carefully. Now we are at engine room 4 of 5, which is the DNS and Active Directory. So in a slide, I use DNS as a GPS system, okay, which actually means domain name system. Yeah, the slide says DNS lets computer find each other by name instead of numbers. Okay, think about Google Maps. You don't normally memorize the exact coordinates of every business you visit. You search by name. Yes, when you want to visit a place you don't know on Google Map, you search by name. You don't search by your coordinates. Okay, so DNS provides a similar naming and location function for network resources. I gave an example of server1.meridianretail.com. Okay, so DNS helps translate that name into a network information needed to read the correct computer. Okay, and here's the important sentence: Active Directory cannot work properly without a DNS. Never. Okay, this is extremely important. Imagine a Kumasi laptop wants to log in. Okay, using the same Meridian analogy. Okay, remember we have one in Accra, which is the head office. We have one in Kumasi, a branch there. We have one also in London. Okay, so imagine an employee at Kumasi uses a laptop to log in. The computer needs to locate the appropriate Active Directory services. Okay, and DNS helps to discover where these services are. In the slides, I mentioned SRV records and CNAME records. You don't need to master all those right now. The key lesson here is that Active Directory depends heavily on DNS. So if you're troubleshooting an AD environment and DNS is broken, don't be surprised when authentication and other directory functions start failing. This is why network knowledge is so important for cybersecurity. You can't isolate cybersecurity from networking, never. Now we are at engine room 545, which is functional levels, okay? And I call this the compatibility settings. The definition says functional level controls which Active Directory features are available based on the oldest Windows Server version still operating as a domain controller. Okay, so I use a group chat analogy. Imagine a group of people using phones. One person has an old phone. The newest feature may not work for everyone because that older phone doesn't support it. So the group has to operate within the compatibility limits of the environment. Okay, the same basic idea is being used here. If an older domain controller is still part of the environment, that can limit the functional level. So in the slides, I identify two types, which is the domain functional level, that is DFL, and then forest functional level, which is FFL. So higher levels can unlock newer capabilities, but the environment has to meet the required compatibility conditions. Okay, why is this important? Because enterprises often don't upgrade everything at the same time. No, you may have old service, newer service, legacy applications, new applications. So compatibility becomes a major concern. And this is one reason enterprise upgrades requires planning rather than let's just install the newest thing. We are moving to the latest version section. Okay, the slide says what is new in Windows Server 2025, because in this series I'll be using Windows Server 2025. Okay, this is important because you might hear someone says Active Directory is old. Yes, Active Directory has been around for a long time, but old does not automatically mean irrelevant. Large organizations still depend heavily on enterprise identity infrastructure. Okay, and Microsoft continues improving Windows Server Active Directory related capabilities. So if you are studying cybersecurity, learning Active Directory is still highly valuable, especially because enterprise security involves understanding how identity, permissions, servers, and authentication systems actually works. Okay, in the slides I gave 4 areas, which is security improvement. So I mentioned stronger protection against modern attacks and credential theft. This is extremely important. Attackers constantly look for ways to steal credentials and abuse identity. So security improvements aim to make the environment more resistant to modern threats. Okay, the next one, we have directory scalability. Okay, Active Directory can comfortably hold far more objects. Why does that matter? Because organizations grow. Yes, a small company might have 100 employees, but a multinational company could have hundreds of thousands of objects. The directory needs to scale. Now we move on to the third one, which is performance optimization. The slides mention faster searches, faster logins, faster replications. Okay, imagine an organization with thousands of employees. If authentication is slow, employees feels it. Yes, if directory search are slow, administrators also feels it. If replication is slow, changes may take longer to reach other systems. So performance really matters. That is why the new update is something to look at, and that's why I'm using this in this series. Okay, hybrid identity readiness. This one is especially important today. Okay, better connection between one site Active Directory and a cloud identity. Many organizations aren't purely on-premises anymore. They may have on-premises infrastructure, cloud services, SaaS application, remote workers. So identity has become more distributed. Cybersecurity professionals therefore needs to understand both traditional enterprise identity and then modern cloud identity. Now we are looking at the 32 database page size, a bigger storage room. Okay, this sounds very technical, yeah. So let's make it very simple here. In the slide, I says Windows Server 2025 allows database to use larger storage pages, 32K instead of the older, smaller size. And importantly, this feature is optional. In this presentation, I compare this to storing files in boxes. Okay, imagine you have small boxes. Each box can hold only a limited amount of information. So you need more boxes and more trips. Now imagine larger boxes. You can move more information per box. The basic idea is that larger database pages can support certain scalability and perform benefits in every larger environment. The Meridian example analogy I use helps connect with increased scalability, higher attribute limits, better performance in a very large environment. Look at the warning on this slide. Plan and test before turning it on inside a real life company network. That is very important. The sentence is extremely important for everyone going into IT. Don't treat production infrastructure like your personal laptop. You don't experiment carelessly on a live business environment, okay? A configuration change can affect thousands of users. So the professional process is understand it, test it, validate it, plan the deployment, and then deploy it. So the next slide is basically going to talk about what to do before you upgrade. The requirement to add a 2025 domain controller, okay? This slide gives us a checklist, and I want you to understand why every item is there on this checklist. Requirement 1 is that forest functional level must be at least Windows Server 2016. This is about compatibility at a forest level, okay, at the forest level. Then the requirement 2 is that domain functional level must be at least Windows Server 2016 as well. Again, compatibility reasons. And then the third requirement is existing replication between domain controllers must be what? Healthy. Yes, this is extremely important. Imagine you already have multiple domain controllers. They are supposed to replicate directory information between each other, okay? But replication is broken. Then you add another domain controller. You haven't magically fixed the original problem. You may have introduced another component into the unhealthy environment. So you check replication health first. Then we have the fourth requirement, which is DNS must be configured and working correctly. We have already learned why DNS is very important. Active Directory depends heavily on DNS. So if DNS isn't working correctly, the upgrade can encounter problems. And in the slides, I give a serious warning that skip this checklist and your upgrade can break the whole network. This is why enterprise system administration requires planning. It's very important. You don't upgrade critical infrastructure simply because a new version exists. No, we don't do that. That's why most of the times some people may go to some organization and even see them still using Windows 10 or even older versions of Windows. Yeah, it really takes planning. We don't just get up and then do upgrades. Okay, so you first determine, is this existing environment healthy? Is it compatible? Is DNS working correctly? Is replication working? Then you can proceed. Okay, now family, we are at the recap phase. This is where we test whether the whole chapter has actually made sense. In the slide, I summarized Active Directory as one system to manage users, computers, and then rules. And then domain becomes more useful than a work group as a company grows. Yeah, and as I said, a work group is just you managing one computer at a time. Okay, you manually managing one computer. So if you have like 10 or 50 computers, each computer manages its own users and passwords and all that. Okay, but with the domain, it's a centralized place. Okay, you set a rule at one place and then you push it to the others. And then we have authentication, which answers the question who you are, and authorization answers the question what you can touch after you've been authenticated. Then we talked about Active Directory saves businesses time through things like single sign-on, and then we talked about group policy. Then we have our logical structure, which is the forestry, domain, organizational units, and then sites. And behind the scenes, we talked about the schema, global catalog, domain controllers, DNS, then functional levels. And finally, Windows Server 2025 brings improvement around security, performance, and what scale. Now, family, don't just memorize this slide, okay? Try to explain each one in your own words. If I ask you what is authentication, you should be able to say it proves who you are, okay? If I ask what is authorization, you should say it determines what you are allowed to access. If I ask what is an OU, you should know it is a logical container for organizing AD objects, okay? If I ask what is a site, you should think physical or network location. If I ask what is a domain controller, you should think an actual server running Active Directory domain services and handling directory-related operations. So if you can explain this concept without looking at the slides, you are beginning to understand Active Directory rather than simply memorizing it. Now, family, this is where things get exciting. In the slides, which is part 2, we will be building our own Active Directory lab. So as you can see here, I've created this. You can see clients over here. You can see Windows 11 clients number 3, number 2, number 1, and we have the domain controller over here, which is Win2K. That is Windows 2025 domain controller 1. Okay, don't forget about this one. When you read the attacking section, we'll be using Kali Linux and then maybe Ubuntu. But for the Ubuntu is for mobile penetration testing. When we start the mobile penetration testing, that's when we'll be using it. So we'll be using these clients. I'll be showing you how to create all these. Okay, yes, I'll be showing you how to create all that. So number one, you install Windows Server. Number two, we promote it into a domain controller, and then we create our first forest and domain. On the next step, we add our first users and organizational units. And this is exactly why everything we've learned in chapter 1 matters. Yes, if you don't understand what we spoke about, you really understand what we are doing in the practicals very well. Keep watching the videos where you didn't understand. Go back and rewatch the videos again. Okay, I've really broken things down, and if you have any question, you can leave it under the comment section and I'll do well to explain it for you to understand better. When you get to the practical labs and I say we are going to promote this server to a domain controller, you should understand what that means. Okay, you are not just clicking a button, you are creating an actual piece of infrastructure that will participate in our organizational identity system. Okay, when we create a forest, you should understand what the forest represents. When we create a domain, you should understand what that domain represents. And when we create an OU, you should understand why we are organizing users and computers inside it. That is the difference between following instruction and actually understanding what you are doing. So make sure to follow it through because chapter 2 is where we are going hands-on. So thank you for learning chapter 1 for mastering Active Directory for cybersecurity. Okay, and honestly, congratulations for getting this far because Active Directory can be confusing when you are seeing these concepts for the first time. I was there, trust me. It really took time for me to really understand these things, but now you have the foundation. You understand what Active Directory is, you understand why centralized management matters, you understand Workgroup versus domain, you understand authentication versus authorization, you understand why businesses use group policy, and you have started building the Active Directory structure in your head. Forest, tree, domain, OU, sites. Then we went behind the scenes and look at schema, global catalog, domain controller, DNS, functional unit. And finally, we look at Windows Server 2025 section. So don't worry if you don't remember everything immediately. Go back, watch the lesson over and over again, pause the video, take notes, draw the forest tree, domain, OU, and site structure yourself, okay? And most importantly, don't just memorize definition. Ask yourself, why does this exist? What problem does it solve? What happens if it breaks? How could an attacker abuse it? How could a defender protect it? These questions are going to take you from simply knowing cybersecurity terminologies to actually thinking like a cybersecurity professional. Okay, so family, this is where we are going to end today's lesson. If this was your first time learning Active Directory, I hope you now have a much clearer picture of what we are dealing with. Okay, in the next part, we are going to stop talking about the theory. We are going to build our own Active Directory lab from scratch. We are going to install Windows Server. We are going to promote the server into a domain controller. We are going to create a forest and domain. And then we are going to start creating users and organizational units. So if you don't want to miss that practical part, make sure you follow Dennis Digital Lab and turn on your notification. Yes, like this, share it to people who needs to watch this video. And if you are watching this on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, or wherever you find this video, share it with someone who is also learning cybersecurity. Remember, you won't become a cybersecurity professional by memorizing big words. You become better by understanding how the system actually works. This is Dennis from Dennis Digital Lab. Stay curious, keep learning, and most importantly, stay secure. I'll see you in part 2.